I don't mean to slap all the medicines down, especially for those people who have found medicine that actually works. But I do say that in my world, it's not just the medicines that don't work, it's the diagnoses that don't work. In other words, maybe there's nothing wrong with you. Even if you're miserable, even if you're in pain, even if you're afraid, even if you're anxious, even if you're depressed, even if you're aimless, even if you have insomnia, even if you have a tough time in social settings, like all those things are part of what it is to be human. In this crazy world, feeling uncomfortable should be embraced. It's no sign of mental health to be sane in an insane world. And I don't have it that the laboratory medicines that were created are designed to do anything more than perpetuate the symptoms they're marketed to treat.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Psychedelic Conversations. Today we have Dr. Fred Moss in the house. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me, Susan. It's a deep pleasure to be here with you. A true honor.
Thank you so much. Thank you for creating this time to connect and share your wisdom with us today. Just to give context to our listeners, would like to share a little bit of your bio, and then we can take it from there.
Okay.
Dr. Fred Moss is a mental health advocate, psychiatrist, serving in many capacities: keynote speaker, psychiatry expert witness, podcaster, mental health coach, and teacher. A desire to help people be real and heard has been the driving force leading him to multiple settings and roles as a psychiatrist over the years, and compelling him continually look for better, more effective ways to provide the highest quality care, to continue look to align people with their most authentic self, to deliver into an eagerly awaiting world. I love these words. And you are also the amazing creator of Welcome to Humanity, the True Voice course, Healing the Healer, and the Global Madness. It's such a pleasure to have you. And what brings you to this space? Maybe we can learn a little bit about your background.
Excuse me. So what brings me to the space is there's as you suggested in my bio, there's been an opportunity for me to really be my truest self ever since I arrived on Earth about 65 years ago. I learned right when I came here that communication was at the heart of all healing. I was born into a family that had two brothers that were 10 and 14 years older than me, as well as my parents. And I could see that the big people actually talked to each other, and that things would happen when they talked. I firmly remember being in my playpen and watching them, speak to each other, and really get the communication and connection was really what was enchanting about life. Now, I don't think I used those words as a child, but I can tell you that I really was always super eager to learn how to communicate. How do I learn to speak? How do I learn to talk? How do I learn to listen? How do I learn to create from conversation? And we fast forward a little bit. I know we're not going to be able to go day to day from the time I was born, but in elementary school, I was also deeply interested in learning about conversation, but it wasn't really there for me to learn. Kids were interested in other things. And I kept on thinking that conversation would be something I would learn in the next level. Like maybe I would learn it at junior high, or maybe I'd learn it at high school, or maybe, even in high school, it wasn't really there, not in the school setting. We were asked instead to regurgitate what the teacher said. And as long as we could do it really accurately, then they gave us credit for moving on to the next grade. And then in college, that's when I really started exploring all this whole idea of communication, late in high school and college. but it wasn't in school. It was out of school. It was like when I was skipping class, or when I was, in the Arboretum or something at the University of Michigan where I attended. And, I'd be on the diag, which is the central area. And I loved communicating with the people in Ann Arbor and the people and my friends. And, I became a communication specialist, I think. I became someone that people just came to and spoke and told their whole story to. And from this, I realized that I was probably suited to do some kind of mental health work, social work, or psychiatry, or whatever. I dropped out of college and I went across the country to find myself, actually. I got on a Greyhound bus and went across the country. I dropped out again, actually. I dropped out twice. And the second time, I came back home and told my mom that there'd be no way I would ever go back to college. And she told me that I needed to get a job, because that's the way moms are. They think like that. And so I got a job as a child care worker in a state mental health facility. And that's where I really seriously began to learn that communication and connection were healing in and of themselves. These kids, they were only 6 or 7 years younger than me, and I would have conversations with them and we would both heal. And all I had to do was treat them like human beings, like treat them like there's just another soul there. And I loved doing that, but I hated the way psychiatry worked. Psychiatry was already in its starting stages of using medication and restraints as a way of managing people. And as a child care worker, we had to be part of that. I didn't want any part of that. And so I decided to go back into school to learn how to be a psychiatrist so that I could inject communication into my skills and actually be a psychiatrist that used conversation. Now, as you know, as most people know, psychiatry has become quite typecast over the years. And now, if you ask, over the next 30 years, Prozac was introduced, and then all the medicines that came after Prozac in 1987 have really altered the face of what psychiatry and mental health is about. And if you ask people now, like, what's the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist? Almost everyone has the same answer. And that is that a psychiatrist can, prescribe medicines. And I hated prescribing medicines. I actually hated prescribing psychoactive pharmacological based, medicines. I thought that they were doing damage. I knew a lot about medicines. I had to, but each time I wrote a prescription for a psychotropic medicine, my heart sank, and I had soul sacrifice. And this happened over 100,000 times, Susan. I wrote over 100,000 prescriptions as a psychiatrist, and I had over 40,000 patients. So there's a lot of heartbreak there. There's a lot of soul sacrifice. And I began to realize that I wasn't an advocate for diagnosis and I wasn't an advocate for medications. So I began to back out of the system. I never was a straight up conventional psychiatrist, but in 2006 and then later in 2016, I made abrupt changes where I started taking people off of medicine and actually taking them off their diagnosis and getting them better just by taking them off these toxic drugs. Now, in 2016, I designed Welcome to Humanity, and Welcome to Humanity is now pretty self-explanatory business. And what that is that really getting that all of our human experiences are sacred, whether they're unpleasant or pleasant, whether miserable or miraculous, whether they're beautiful or hateful, they're all sacred. And I really began to understand that. Now, when speaking to what your listenership is interested in, and maybe a little bit to you, I certainly dabbled with a little bit with non-pharmacological drugs. The drugs in Ann Arbor, where I used, a lot of psychedelics in Ann Arbor and a lot of marijuana, and really exploring that as a recreational user. But I could see its value. I deeply could see its value. And as we expand further from 2016. I began to really look at how can these medicines be used valuably? Like, is it possible to employ some of the psychoactive plant medicines, the kind that God gave us, to actually make a difference in the world, to actually learn about the expansive nature of what life is about. So in 2018 and 19, I began to look at that a little bit more seriously, including, befriending some people who were doing cannabis ceremonies, and then there was some psilocybin ceremonies and ayahuasca ceremonies, and then microdosing, or dealing with lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, and working with MDMA, and starting to look at how these medicines might play a role in the future of psychiatry, or the future of mental health. The truth is, I think where I'm at now, I have so much distrust for the basic psychiatric model that even though some people might be really excited about these medicines becoming more mainstream, for instance, psilocybin actually falling into the hands of the mainstream medical community, I'm not as excited about that. Because I feel like the mainstream community will likely botch that up entirely. Just as I also feel that they're kind of, ketamine is a very interesting medication, extremely interesting. It's a much smoother ride than some of these other drugs, and it offers the opportunity to really visualize and experience the divinity and the infinity and the eternity of all of life, and the cyclical nature of life and death, which is very beautiful. It's really exceptional to learn that that we're not just going to die and go away. It's learning, when we learn that really alters life drastically. So I am working now to do a little bit more ketamine prescribing. Here in California, there's still not legal to prescribe any of the other psychedelics. I suppose cannabis, if you consider that a psychedelic, and some do. And to use effectively with proper integration. So these days, I don't prescribe any psychotropic medicines that came out of a laboratory ever, except for occasionally ketamine. And I have promised for the use of plant medicines and other psychedelics, but the use of those medicines should come. I am more interested in that being done by specialists and shaman, people who are not in the direct conventional medical community, because I really know how that medical community goes, and I don't have it that they can make the transition of all the beauty that's inside of the experiences of psychedelic plant medicine or psychedelic natural medicines that are out there, and without botching it up and kind of, creating indications and contraindications and side effects and all that nonsense. And so I am concerned about it actually making it into the mainstream conventional psychiatric industry.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
Is there any value in the psychotropic medications? Is there any value at all for an intervention? Let's say, I'm just being an advocate of, let's see what we can do here. Are they all bad, or is it the way that it's been used or prescribed in the Western?
Right. It's a great question, and people usually aren't as blunt about the question. But here's my answer to the question, especially for your listeners that are on medicines who they think is working. So sometimes people take, antidepressants or anti-anxiety agents, or Depakote or Seroquel, or they take something for sleep, or they take occasional Xanax, or they on Celexa or Lexapro, or the generic drugs that represent those parent drugs, and they think that it's really helping them. And for this conversation, I'm not telling those people that they need to come off their medicine. If people are happy with the medicine they're taking, then it's indicated. If people are happy with the medicine, if they feel like they have found some relief that makes their life better, then by all means, please continue to use those medicines. If any time in life that you find something that's actually working for you to make your life work, you should continue doing it, no matter what it is. Now, the truth is, I don't prescribe these medicines to newcomers ever, never again. I don't see them as being top shelf. I don't see them as being very helpful. I sometimes will support, like, represcribing or refilling medicines that have worked for clients. But I don't have it that the antidepressants are very helpful at all. I think the recent studies also show that they don't do anything. And if they do anything, they actually cause depression. And the anti-anxiety agents are the same way. They no doubt that the anti-anxiety agents cause panic and anxiety. And there's also, in my world, no doubt that the anti-manic patients, the the bipolar drugs, frequently contribute directly to the ongoing perpetuation of bipolarity. Now, again, I don't mean to slap all the medicines down, especially for those people who have found medicine that actually works. But I do say that in my world, it's not just the medicines that don't work, it's the diagnoses that don't work. In other words, maybe there's nothing wrong with you. Even if you're miserable, even if you're in pain, even if you're afraid, even if you're anxious, even if you're depressed, even if you're aimless, even if you have insomnia, even if you have a tough time in social settings, even if, like, all those things are part of what it is to be human. In this crazy world, feeling uncomfortable should be embraced. It's no sign of mental health to be sane in an insane world. And so that we really start looking at that. And I don't have it that the laboratory medicines that were created are designed to do anything more than perpetuate the symptoms they're marketed to treat.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So, which I'm hearing that being uncomfortable is now made to be a business to capitalize on.
Right.
Yeah.
Being uncomfortable is not synonymous with being sick. That's for sure.
Yeah. So how do we change this paradigm? How do we help people come to this conclusion? Because at the moment, like you said, it's perpetuated to think there's something wrong with them. So how do you come back to helping them understand?
Well, there's a group of people, a lot of people who are either considering going into mental health to be evaluated because they think they're miserable or sad or different than others, or angry or fearful or muted or muffled or stifled, and they want to go get evaluated. Now, the truth is they don't really want to get evaluated, Susan. You know what they really want? They really want a diagnosis. If they got evaluated and the doctor said they were okay, they would be upset. This is the only subspecialty in all of medicine that if the doctor says you're okay, you get upset. Wow. If you go to a cardiologist or an orthopedist or a kidney specialist and they say you're okay, you're like, oh, good, thank you. If you go to a psychiatrist and they say you're okay, you just you flip them off and go find a real psychiatrist next door to get the diagnosis you're looking for.
What is this insatiable need to be diagnosed?
I think that's a beautiful question. You have great questions, Susan. It's beautiful work. So the insatiable need to be diagnosed, I think, is about relinquishing responsibility for taking control of your life. The truth is, if I'm a jerk to my wife, or I'm a jerk and if I do something stupid, or if I do something I'm ashamed of, I would rather blame something else than actually take responsibility for it. Maybe I'll blame another person, or maybe I can blame my diagnosis. You might have already heard people say stuff like, hey, that wasn't me, that was my bipolar acting up. Or that wasn't me, that's my ADHD. There's my social phobia. There you go. That's, there's my depression. There's my spectrum, whatever you want to say. And I think that people get excited about diagnosing themselves because it gives them the option to lean on a reason for living life less than what they wish they could. Now, the other thing is that the diagnosers, they have an incentive too, because when I sit on my high horse and I start diagnosing, the assumption is that I'm more normal than you. And that, of course I am. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm more normal than you. I'm the one who has the book. I'm the one who delivers the goods. I'm the one who knows. I'm the one who's rooted in reality. The truth is that diagnosers also have sort of an ego-driven need to diagnose people in a way that leaves them feeling confirmed that everything's okay with them. So it's a very powerful position to point at someone and say, you're out of bounds.
Yeah. And it's feeding into this very deeply ingrained codependency, perpetuation of the codependency.
Exactly. It really does. It feeds directly into that. The idea that, that we look for cheap thrills. As diagnosers and diagnosed, we look for cheap answers. We look for short answers to a world that is really pretty complex. And if it's not complex, you could make a case that it's actually pretty simple. That living is actually pretty simple. Just simply accept what's going on. Be forgiving, be compassionate, be accepting, and be grateful. We could make a case that that's all life really is, but in fact, we like to look for reasons for why we feel bad or why we feel worse, or we look for ways to elevate ourselves over the rest of people. Like, I am this and I'm special, and you're not this, and therefore you're not special.
Yeah, I see this happening more as of
Right.
late. And also the new trend, I think, is the trauma diagnosis, the word of use of the trauma, because everybody gets out of the jail card if you have that.
Yeah, it's true. The whole post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis, and now the multiple variants of PTSD that exist, is you do get a get out of jail card. Like, I was there when my mom died, or I was there when I watched a car accident, or we all have trauma, and many of us have it on a daily basis. And it's part of humanity to experience trauma. And this idea of, I didn't get over it, and that's why I X, or that's why I don't Y, is, I'm not going to, again, I don't want to disregard the clients or patients in your audience who really find that this helps their life to live with that diagnosis. On the other hand, it can be relooked, and the truth is, trauma is not recurring. Typically, trauma is not recurring. Now, certainly there are certain situations like that we know about, like in the trafficking world, or in the battered, in the domestic violence world, where trauma does recur. And I'm not speaking directly to that right now. I'm saying that the trauma that you experienced last week or last year, or when you were a child, is not here anymore. And there's an opportunity to actually accept, forgive, and collect yourself, even on the backside of those traumas, and not have it be a dictator for how you live the next moments in your life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So what is the missing link for the capacity to regulate and not be stuck in trauma? How do we bring this to larger communities' attention?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, and I really do believe that this might be a factor, is that the medicine sometimes cement the notion of recurrent trauma. So it almost like freezes you inside the trauma. If you have a trauma, and let's say a car accident or something, and you come and they give you a medicine to deal with the traumatic after effects, sometimes those medicines actually perpetuate the symptoms by freezing you in that trauma. So the one thing to do is to keep yourself clean as best as you can. This is a very dirty world. The things that we see, the things that we hear, the things that we smell, the things that we taste, these are very toxic times. So you want to do your best to keep yourself clean. That's very important. And then when you're really looking at like how to get the trauma out of your system or how to reflect on it, there's something like embracing the trauma and and that's not condoning it. It's not the same as saying it was okay, but really getting it as an experience in life, one of those many smorgasbord level experiences of misery or of pain or suffering that become part of life. And when you incorporate those, you can see by altering the narrative, simply transforming the narrative, that trauma itself doesn't have to reoccur. And you get to define, the traumatized, can define how trauma gets metabolized through your system. You get to say, I have had some significant trauma myself. In fact, I had recent open heart surgery, for instance, just 10 weeks ago. And, I could make a really big deal that that's still affecting me. And it is. I'm healing. I feel, they split my sternum in half and went right in there. And, you could call that an important trauma for sure. But the idea is that it doesn't have to be relived, and it doesn't have to be in the way of me making responsible decisions in the future.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So thank you for highlighting the distinction of embracing the trauma.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the distinction that a lot of the people coming back to the psychedelic medicines and using them for healing trauma and helping people with mental health challenges and all of that. I think one of the things that really the first pushback is always about there is this natural way the medicine wants to help the person heal and also feel and lean into something that is held in the body, which then oftentimes a person freaks out thinking and associating it with a past negative experience. And the first reaction is, I'm not going there.
Right.
This is the side effect. I don't understand how this is going to help me. It's taking me right back into my discomfort.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's now we have this situation. Psychedelic medicines are being mainstreamed. What do we do with this situation?
I think again, we like to think that there's something to do. I think that the specialists with the plant medicines, with the psychedelic medicines, I think you're referring to those natural psychedelic medicines because ketamine is laboratory produced, of course, and some of these others will be laboratory produced. They'll find a way to put psilocybin in a capsule for sure. And they'll find a way to put MDMA into a tablet for sure. And, even ayahuasca will probably find its way into, however they do it, into the mainstream delivery system. There's something like, trusting the elders and trusting the people from the indigenous population, for instance, the Peruvians or the shamans, to help us walk through these times, whether that's with frog medicine or with plant medicine or whatever, like really getting that the essence of this medicine comes from a space that does not have a trademark associated with it.
Yeah, and I hear a lot of conversations around that. There's the medical model, there's the shamanic or the traditional indigenous model. So kind of like we split all over. There's so many people advocating for some model of use. What are your thoughts on the most effective use? Let's say I hear you saying about the trusting the elders. But what does that mean to a Western person living isolated life, not having that kind of connection or even understanding?
Well, I think there's probably some value in considering psychedelics. There's not that many people anymore who don't have access to elders. like what you and I don't have a natural access to each other, but here we are on the internet having a very intimate conversation. We've never met before, but we're having a full-scale, intimate conversation. And this becomes available. You can have an online shamanic experience, for instance, with any of these medications. And so it isn't true that you're not connected to the elders or to the shamanic population or to the indigenous populations. The internet and our capacity to communicate via this platform allows for connections with people that otherwise may have appeared to be too far away or separate or unavailable. But I think we now have it that is available, and you can have it. You can have that work for you. Also, in the world of like, depending on which medicine you're speaking to, which ceremonies or which things you're interested in, or what you want to try or dabble with, the idea is that sometimes these shaman or the elders, they travel around the country, and they can get pretty close, with some of the churches, et cetera. You can get pretty close to your neighborhood, so you don't have to take a very long drive, and you can actually get involved with these ceremonies that otherwise you might think are restricted to South America.
Yeah, that's very true. You said earlier about how the medical model or the people in the medical side of the world might make a really big mess, just kind of paraphrasing in my own way, make a mess of like how to use this. So at least have the applications of these psychedelic medicines, because they will create all these contraindications and obstacles, and then leave out some people, categorize who should be taking, who should not be taking, which is already happening. For example, there are harm reduction concepts like certain people shouldn't even touch these medicines, such as bipolar, schizophrenic tendencies. What are your thoughts on that?
That's just, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I think that it annihilates the access to some medicines that, see, I don't have it that people are their diagnosis, their mental. I don't diagnose people anymore. If you were my client, I would diagnose you simply as Susan Gunner. That's it. That would be it. That's your diagnosis. And that's everyone's diagnosis, is who they are. So, in the schizophrenic populations, for instance, I have it that once you receive the diagnosis, then you start living the life of someone who you think is a schizophrenic. And not only do you start living that life psychologically, but if given medicines that actually create psychosis, you will in fact pick up symptoms that are consistent with your diagnosis. And so it really is meant frequently. I'm not sure it's entirely nefarious, but it might be. This idea of really exploring and exploiting that the medicines and the diagnosis are there to perpetuate the symptoms they're marketed to treat. So when you bring these medicines when you bring the powerful medicines from the earth or from the forest into mainstream into mainstream conventional medical industry, they have no choice but to put all sorts of like barriers and measures and contraindications and things, and it's not done for the purpose of the value of the medicine. It's done for the purpose of like categorizing and probably in some form monetizing and keeping the liability down. That's more or less what the incentives seem to be.
I understand. Is it because it will be costly, time consuming, and we'll have to repurpose, restructure to able to make it inclusive?
Well, I think that's one reason. And I think the other reason is that, modern medicine is not interested in the divine. They're not interested in the eternal. They're not interested in the infinite. They're not interested in the higher powers of the world. And in fact, if you come into an emergency room and you start talking like that, the next thing that'll happen is you'll have a psychiatrist by your side evaluating you, and they'll think that you're already psychiatrically ill. So these medicines often give us access to a place where modern medicine does not endorse or support what your findings are when you go down those journeys. If you start speaking about eternity and divinity, infinity, life cycle issues or incarnations or anything like that, or that God has your back, or that you're going to be taken care of by the nature and the forces, you will be called psychotic pretty quickly, and you will be thrown into a psychiatric hospital. So there's an interface there that is very agitated, and it's like modern medicine is not built to absorb what it is that these plant medicines are bringing forth.
Wow. How did we get here? What's the force?
It's a really good question. Again, a super good question, very broad and important question. And I think we, over the evolutionary times, we have fallen victim to what it is to be normal. Some of the older experiences in the past that seem to really underline this notion, for instance, are the witch trials. You start looking at what is normal, that I am normal and you're not, becomes a really important piece of this. So in the world of science as a near religion, this idea of science being something that is now seen as being the core of what reality is by many people, we're left with disregarding so much of what life has to offer inside the scientific model. And I just think, I don't know, I just think there's a tendency for humans to want to elevate themselves over others. And there's a lot of definitions that are embedded in our way of thinking of what it means to be human as a society that are only agreement realities, and frankly don't have any strong stakes in the ground when looking back at like the Zen warriors of the past, or the indigenous populations of the past, who including and not limiting, including like the American Indian, and really all these people who had a totally different view of what it meant to be alive. We just disregarded them and created a view of our own that has to live on its own, and therefore we have to acquire and then agree to some of the delusions that are embedded in that way of thinking.
Yeah, it's very powerful. Thank you for that. Are you aware of this concept of Moloch?
What is it?
Moloch or Moloch?
Not. You're going to have to explain it to me, unfortunately.
I came across not long ago. It's actually a wonderful young lady. She started defining it for younger generation, or at least everyone on social media, and just kind of warning everyone about the dangers of this level of perpetuation. So Moloch was defined by her as it's like the shadow part of humanity, creating this thing that then eventually becomes conscious and aware of itself, and there's this momentum, and in this momentum everybody's kind of on board, jumping on the ship. And what it means for us is that we slowly start self-sacrificing, letting go of values, beliefs, principles, to be part of this thing. Otherwise, we are out of the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's brilliant.
I thought it was fascinating.
It's really great. Yeah, in some of my trainings, they use this word called tranquilized obviousness.
Yeah.
And that's sort of at the root of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so coming back to psychedelic medicines, what would be the best way to talk about this? You're someone that I really respect, and I can hear your passion and how you have integrated it, and what you are, where you stand in that, and how can we speak of these in the best way possible? What would be the best practices, and how can we bring it more in the best way for our listeners, at least for our listeners?
Well, I think there's, I don't like to ask listeners or you to consider doing anything illegal. That's for sure. You don't do stuff illegal. On the other hand, these medicines are illegal in many situations and should be tried. If you're eager to wonder what some of these medicines can do, or somebody who's partaked and receive some significant benefit from their journey, then you should consider doing the same. And it's not more than likely you won't be arrested at this point in time. So I like using it before it gets. I like the idea of using it long before it gets. Don't wait for it to come into the medical complex. I guess that's something like that. It'll be altered and annihilated in so many ways as it comes into the complex, that I don't suspect that you'll get the same positive results as you will with a trained shaman or a trained leader of some sort who can walk you through these journeys and integrate you on the backside. So keep an open mind. They are available, and there's a preponderance. There's a lot of people who are offering these opportunities, these psychedelic opportunities, and they do open up the way you look at life and provide some release and relief to the main fear in life, which I believe the main fear in life is the fear of death. And it really alters the way we think of death fundamentally. And when the fear of death gets dissolved or altered fundamentally, the paradigm, terror that we have of death, it can change the way we live very drastically.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And so, what are your thoughts on the conversations around people creating spaces that are not so safe? Because I am observing the mainstream online communities, and there is almost every other day someone is being harmed by a facilitator who just took a few sessions of the medicine and then decided to be a provider, and all kinds of conversations are happening. What are your thoughts?
Right. Right. It's a these are difficult times. You should vet out who you work with, and you should vet out who you sleep with. You should vet out who you eat with. You should vet out who you meet with. And we can't be certain that who we're meeting is safe, and or that we're going to be taken care of. And there are charlatans for sure in this field, and in any bursting open field, charlatans show up at the roots of it and pretend to be experts. So I don't have much to say on like how to generally protect yourself, other than do your due diligence and do your research on the people that you're meeting intimately with for any reason. Yeah,
thank you for highlighting that. In your experience and your opinion, working with different types of medicines, such as psilocybin, ayahuasca, and LSD. So I would love to hear your expert opinion on what do you think of LSD, MDMA, ketamine. Let's put them, not trying to categorize them, but in terms of like, there is also a division of like, these are earth medicines, entheogens, and these are lab creations. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that ketamine, especially, I like the rapid dissolving tablet formulation for ketamine. I think that it's a super clean ride into the divine. Super clean, amazing ride. Amazing on the way up and amazing on the way out. Short acting, leaves you effective. You can drive home. It's a beautiful ride, and it gives access to a really broad base of experience. With LSD, I think the electric Kool-Aid acid test folks are going all the way back to Timothy Leary and all that. all the people in the 60s who glamorized LSD. It's an extraordinary experience for sure, and broadens mentality and broadens intellect, broadens creativity, and it's not for everybody. I don't think it's for everybody. And then when you start talking about microdosing LSD, that's also a very fascinating concept, this idea of getting all those benefits without losing your sense of reality. Everyone from Silicon Valley and multiple places have tried that, and there's some deep effectiveness. Same thing with MDMA. I think that, when you look at the laboratory aspects of MDMA, which is, naturally comes from the earth, but has been created in the laboratory, is the value in good hands of high potency, high quality MDMA in learning a little bit about love and compassion with other folks is extraordinary. Like, what does it really mean to be in love with yourself and with humanity and another person? There's a real access to that MDMA provides.
And what about the entheogens, so to speak?
The what?
Entheogens are, directly from earth, like psilocybin, ayahuasca.
Right. Again, I think I would lean on the shaman, lean on the experts, lean on those who grew up with the medicine, whether it's, again, what frog medicine, or if it's ayahuasca or psilocybin, the mushrooms, and really start looking at the people who knew then, who still know now. And that experience can be very, very rich and very, like mystical and beautiful. And you can learn a lot inside of those experiences. So I support those.
That is so wonderful. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to move into your work, and very interested in hearing more about some of your courses. So if you could maybe give us an overview of what are they? The True Voice course, for example.
Right. The True Voice course is a course that's designed to help people really move the things out of their way that are in their way from being, that leave them muffled or stifled or muted or muzzled or silenced. And most of us have that. Most of us aren't speaking our truth. Most of us are finding ourselves just kind of making it through the day, saying what we don't even believe. Like, isn't that bizarre that we can actually say something that even we don't believe? Like, it's amazing. Amazing that life has come to that we actually can say something that even we don't believe. We pretend to be different people in order to protect the person that we are. And that's just bizarre. And so the True Voice course uses podcasting as a template. It really teaches people in a very pleasant and very comprehensive way to get access to their truest self, and then deliver it effectively into the world using creative means such as podcasting or others. It doesn't force you to be a podcaster, but I love to use podcasting because I think it's the cleanest way in the society right now to get our points across, like we're doing today. The Healing the Healer course is a course meant for disenchanted healers like myself. I'm my ideal client for that one. I'm my, avatar. I'm my dot. And the reason for that is there are so many people who went into the healing arts believing that they had a blessing and a gift, and now they're left actually in the job doing something totally different than what they thought they would do, and muzzled, muffled, stifled, etc. And this group of people really needs to clean up their act and heal themselves. And the whole course is built on helping those people get access to their core self, and then either return back into the field that they were initially in, or find another alternative field that's more consistent with their core values. These courses are super fun. And along with my books, Find Your True Voice and the Creative 8 are aligned with each other. So Find Your True Voice, you can find that at findyourtruevoicebook.com, and I'll send you a hard copy of that. We also have the Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression, which helps people see that there might not be a diagnosis at the bottom of it. In fact, it just might be a lack of creativity that can help with their mental health stability and balance.
That is so wonderful. And what about the global madness?
Yeah, global madness is something that it's kind of on hold right now, but the idea is that if I wanted to be sort of the Anthony Bourdain of mental illness and go around the world seeing that, psychiatry, that, mental illness is seen as different things no matter where you go. So in different cultural centers, mental illness is, like if you have a broken arm, you have a broken arm in Singapore and in Tibet and in London and in Little Rock. But if you have a psychiatric problem, it's not the same. No matter what you are, depending on where you are, it changes. So mental illness has a changing definition worldwide. And that's the global madness, the idea that if it has a changing definition, then it must be simply a conversation subject to transformation.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much for doing this great work. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, as we're slowly coming towards the end of our conversation, I'd like to leave the space for you to share what it intuitively comes through you, and what would you like to share as a message today with our listeners, if there's anything.
The idea is that maybe there's nothing wrong with you. That's really the most important thing. That maybe feeling miserable or feeling different is part of being normal. And then the second idea is that the greatest threat in the world is that you're not speaking your true voice into the world. It's not COVID. It's not anything but your true voice. It's really the greatest threat in the world.
Thank you so much for that. And where can our listeners find you?
The audience can find me best at drfred360.com. Or you can find me at, by going into my website and getting a copy of Creative 8, where that's welcometohumanity.net/Creative 8. And you can get an audio copy of that book.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Fred Moss. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and your work, and hoping to have you return and share more wisdom and follow your journey and your projects for future. Thank you again.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's really been an honor and a great conversation. Thank you for running it. Beautiful stuff.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. Hope you guys enjoyed this session. Please do get in touch with myself or Dr. Fred. We'll have all the links in the show notes. You can comment, share experiences. Don't be shy. And I will see you on the next one. Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Thank you so much for joining us. Psychedelic Conversations podcast is designed to educate, inform, and expand awareness. For more information, please head over to psychedelicconversations.com. You can also share with your friends or leave a review so that we can reach more people. You can also join us in our private Facebook group to keep the conversation going. This show is for information purposes only, and it is not intended to provide mental health or medical advice. Thanks for listening.